Hello everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Today we'll be talking about TestArchitect, the Enterprise Edition. This is one of a series of webinars that we give each week on our product line with TestArchitect for Visual Studio, TestArchitect for Mobile, and TestArchitect for Enterprise. Today we'll be talking about action-based testing methodology and how that can help you in your test environment. My name is John Kane. I'm the product manager at LogicGear, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. Thanks so much for joining. The logistics for this webinar are as usual. Please feel free to enter in chats and dialogues. Want to make sure that we provide you all the information that you need going forward to make your testing and quality enablement decisions. So let's get started. So it looks like my screen is okay there. I'd like to start with discussing not the issues that you have in the test environment. You know them well and they change every day. New applications, new environments, new platforms come out all the time. This list here is more about the issues that you have talked about in the test community that you'd like to be addressed with the solutions that you're looking for. So those issues that we hear most often are about speed, maintainability, reusability, and scalability. So for speed, you'd like to be able to quickly and easily create a large number of tests, and that means be able to create them with high quality. And then as you create those tests, you'd like to be able to make sure that you can maintain those tests as the application or the GUI changes. You don't want to go into maintenance mode and lose the leverage and cadence that you have on test creation. You want to be able to focus on reusing the test design and the test artifacts and the test flow. Leverage that work that you've done over and over again so that you don't have to reinvent it. And then not concentrate on the programming part, but more the test flow part of the environment. And then you'd like to be able to execute data-driven testing for a good test coverage, be able to scale the number of test cases that you have in your environment. And then once you do that, then the entire test team can be able to understand a very readable test flow, and there's good team collaboration so that in your Agile environment you can get those tests out on time with high quality. So those are the issues that you have indicated to the test community that are most prevalent: speed, maintainability, reusability, how to leverage the artifacts that you've done, and scalability, how to get a large number of high-quality test cases. And so action-based testing at LogicGear, we believe that it's more than just a tool, more than just a solution with architecture and a framework. We believe that it's really has three major components. Keyword-driven actions is one. So I'm sure you've heard of keywords and how that can drive the scripts or test cases that you have, but you also need a way to take those actions to drive the test cases in an organized, top-down, business-like fashion. And then you need the solution that uses both the keywords and modular test design. You need the solution with functionality that is applicable to your platform, your application. So let's talk about those three. And first we'll talk about keyword-driven actions. So keywords are a way to replace test scripts where you have lots of programming details, and your test team, although maybe programming competent, it's core competency really is in test flow and test design, and they know the application really well from a user point of view, and that's what they want to concentrate on testing. And so the action-based method is a way to use keywords and actions to get away from the details of programming and replace it with an easy to understand set of action lines and keywords. And so what that looks like is the following. The test developer creates, or the automation engineer creates tests using actions. Each of these actions have an action line with a keyword and a set of variable names and values and arguments. And then below those actions are the definitions for what that action does. And that might be in C# or Java or some programming language, but that's buried away. Everything is at the higher level of abstraction, where looking at the actions you can understand what the test flow is. So in this very small example, new product, add quantity, and check quantity is a set of actions that can show you the flow of a test. And then you go over to look at the variable values to see what the test is about. And it's a very easy way to understand the test without going into the programming details. So that's the main objective of keywords and actions, is to get away from those programming details. And then the advantage of this is to be able to take those low-level actions that you know about, the clicks, the selects, the enters, those kinds of things, gather them together into groups, and those groups you want to group together to call a high-level action. So in this case, say you're on a web page that has a set of products, and you add a product to a cart and you click buy. You want to be able to combine those three actions into one action, maybe called checkout, and then you want to be able to use that high-level action in a higher level action, maybe called order entry. So you can see that it gets away from the interaction with the GUI itself and the low-level actions that take place, and it gets back up to the high-level business level objectives of what that test case is trying to do. So order entry is a high-level business case that is trying to find out if that the test case is trying to find out if that application segment is an order entry and is doing it correctly. Now, the advantage of this technique of gathering these low-level actions into high-level actions is to be able to automatically update any instantiations of that action that exist throughout your test suite. So it's very easy to make one change and have that automatically updated throughout your entire test suite. So for example, if you have a login form and you change the OK button to a submit button, and you make that change in one place, in one action, then throughout your entire test suite, wherever you're using that login, you don't have to go through and make all those changes and all those instantiations, because it's made to the master. So this is an advantage of the hierarchical nature of this action-based method. So the biggest benefit of this is when you want to scale the number of test cases, let's think about how much work is involved in being able to do that. Say you have 2,000 test cases, and it takes about, just say, 200 actions to be able to define the interaction of those test cases. If you want to scale those test cases to 4,000 test cases, then the question is, how many additional actions do you need to do to be able to support those additional 2,000 tests? And the answer is only an incremental few number, if any, actions need to be created, because those actions are leverageable. You can use them over and over and over again throughout your test cases and leverage the work that you've already done out of the action library. And that's a big benefit to going forward, to being able to scale the number of test cases. And again, just because you have double the number of test cases, because of this keyword and action-driven system, it's very easy for everybody on the test team to understand what those tests are doing, what the flow is, what the results are, and it's easy to involve business subject matter experts in that process. So that's keyword-driven actions, and that's very advantageous, but keywords also need a method. They need a methodology to implement, and that implementation is in the modular test design section of this offering. So you want to be able to do test management, test development, and test automation. Most solutions, test solutions out there claim to be one or several of these, and TestArchitect is actually all three of these with a large focus on test development. The reason for that is the majority of your test engineer and test management time is going to be in the test development stage. You spend most of your time creating the test cases and managing them, and then as a result of the keyword-driven aspect of it, automation falls out of that. As you're creating the test cases with those keywords, you get that automation. So this enables the test design to directly drive automation, and that results in less automation effort and more stable and maintainable automation, especially when the application changes. So there's a very limited impact on those that test automation when those cases change, and that's very important when you're trying to go from manual testing to automated testing. So modular test design starts with a test development plan, just as usual, and you think about which kind of tests do I want to do in that test development plan. And those are the objectives that you come up with. In this system, in TestArchitect, those objectives are assigned to test modules. That's a little different than other environments where test cases might have objectives, but this is a higher level of abstraction. So the test module has a set of objectives that need to be achieved for those test cases to be successful, and those objectives are assigned to each of those test modules, and the test modules are pretty much independent of each other. Within those test modules are test cases with similar scope. So that scope defines what those test cases are going to do, and they're all related somehow within that test module. So maybe all your login is in one test module, all your order entry is in another test module. And what you do is group all those test cases within a test module, and they're all related somehow with the same kind of scope. And then you apply the action library, the keywords that we talked about, to those test cases to execute the actions for those test cases. And you have an interface that is the interface between the application under test and the test cases, so that you can protect those test cases when the application or GUI changes. So this is your test development environment, and the idea here is that the test cases are agnostic of the kind of environment that they are going to, the kind of target platform that they are being tested on. For your test cases, they're up at the business level objective, and they've got to achieve those objectives to be successful, and it doesn't matter whether they're going to Linux or Android or iOS or Windows, or they're on a Firefox or Chrome browser. Those kinds of target platforms are essential in the automation engine. So in TestArchitect, one of the differentiations is the target for the application under test is in the automation engine, and the tests themselves are in the test development engine. And so separating those two also helps you get to automation much faster, to be able to separate the business level test objectives with the platform target that it's going to. So this is a system that's suited for complex enterprise-level test projects, very large projects, because it's very maintainable, reusable, leverageable, and especially scalable to a large number of test cases. Again, these are scope-based test modules and scope-based test cases where the flows are very understandable, so the entire team is very involved with that flow and they can understand what those test cases are doing, and they can communicate with each other and other stakeholders for the content of those test cases. This is really an emphasis on test design and test flow and a lot less emphasis on tests on programming details. So again, it's an escape away from the low-level programming details and a much higher business level of abstraction to be able to accomplish those tests. And then you can think of in an Agile environment, this applies also very well. So you have your product owner and your team that goes on several sprints to be able to accomplish very quickly the specification and development of the application. Well, the test team should also be involved in that complete process. So as the R&D team is coming up with the specification, on the far left, the test development plan can be derived with a set of objectives that match those test cases that are going to be accomplished and assigned to test modules. And as the development continues and implementation of the application starts, the test development team can also start on the test cases and start implementing them. So as the sprints go on and the daily scrums go on, then action automation is already part of the test development, and so the test team is totally in step with the R&D team as the product goes through its sprints, and then at the end the automation and reuse gets employed to be able to test the application in a continuous integration kind of environment. So TestArchitect works very well in this environment, since you can start very early and then very often during the flow interact with the steps that R&D is doing throughout the implementation and throughout the test cycle. And then third, we talk about the solution itself. So first, the solution has to utilize keywords and actions, and then it also has to be able to use the modular test design approach to creating those tests. And so here we're talking about TestArchitect. This is the Enterprise edition. And it's an architecture and functionality specifically designed for action-based testing, lets you put together a keyword-driven test automation system, and it helps teams create and maintain a large number of enterprise-level tests for your test automation environment. So to give you an idea of what this looks like, this is simply a drag and drop kind of entry from your action library to your spreadsheet kind of interface. And the idea is that it's very easy to use. Most test engineers like the spreadsheet kind of interface, and looking at this test module that we were talking about, you can see the flow of this test is start application, rent car, check payment, close app, and a kind of car rental application. So it's very easy to understand the flow of this kind of test, and we'll show you that in the demo also. You also have custom actions where you don't have to start from scratch to create that action library. You can use existing code that you have, either C# or Java or any of the .NET languages, and then put a action name around that code, plug that into the custom actions, and be able to call that in your test module. So an action library and a custom set of actions to be able to create your test cases that exist in the test module. So let's talk about how test scripts can be very fragile. You know that for an application under test, it's always under change, and it could very well be that those test scripts are linked directly to that application under test. When that application does change, then it's problematic that all those test scripts now have that incorrect link to the object that was in that application under test that changed. So the idea here is to be able to segregate the test cases from the application under test with this entity called an interface. And in that interface, the test cases link directly to a logical name that you provide, and that name is very readable and understandable, and then the rest of the interfaces are all the IDs and properties of the application under test, with good spy tools to be able to see what values are there in the event that the application changes. You want to apply that test case to, for example, 2 different versions of the application to see how that interface changed. And we'll show you the interface in the demonstration also. So it's very key to separate the test cases from the application under test through this interface so that the test cases don't become fragile and they're very stable and maintainable. And also for a large number of tests, I'm sure that many of you do data-driven test design, and so data-driven is a way to throw lots of different kinds of sets of data at your test to get good test coverage and make sure the quality is high within those test cases. So many kind of systems have this technique. Here you can read directly from a SQL Server or MySQL, or you can read a CSV file, or you can drag and drop from an Excel file or a Word file to get that test data either statically or dynamically. You can apply filters, but the key thing here is that the test cases don't have to change. You can take gobs of data, throw it at that test module and those test cases without having to rewrite those test cases, because they're at the very high level, business level objective, and they don't have to be rewritten for different kinds of data set at the high level. And then variations is a very important concept. As you know, the platform, the target environments that you are applying your application to every day changes just every day, and tomorrow there's going to be a new version. So whether it's browsers or hardware platforms or OS platforms, there's all kinds of variations. You want to be able to handle this in the automation engine. That's very key, because the automation engine has the ability to target, take your application, run it in a specific environment, and then be able to apply the same test case according to that variation. So different kinds of variations might also be languages, might be different versions of your application under test. The idea here is that you have a single test case no matter what the target environment is, no matter what the version is, no matter what the region is. You want to be able to apply that single test case to all of those environments and be able to do that with that single test case. So this is very key in not having to duplicate a lot of test case creation that you've already done. Be able to take the same test case and apply it. And also in your continuous integration environment, you want to be able to have a environment outside of where you create your tests to be able to have a repository and run your tests. So whether that's using the Microsoft environment, here we're showing Microsoft Team Foundation Server, where you can do a build and check in to TFS, and then use the Lab Manager to run the test cases in Microsoft Test Manager MTM. And it's a simple assignment of those tests from either TestArchitect or our other product, TestArchitect for Visual Studio, that works within the Visual Studio environment. So in summary, we believe that testing is more than just a tool with some functionality, with more than just a framework and architecture. We believe that you also have to have the keyword action-based test methodology, and you also need a way to build your test cases with a modular test design technique. And then you can apply that tool and its functionality that utilizes those other two aspects. So TestArchitect Enterprise utilizes action-based testing for that objective-driven approach to creating those tests and be able to get to test automation, and be able to provide a test development environment that's very fast and easy, be able to create a large number of test cases, a test management environment so you can leverage reusability and maintainability when your application changes, and be able to automatically get test automation so that you can have customizable and scalable number of tests. So this is the summary of TestArchitect. If you want more information on this, you can go to testarchitect.com and find lots of information there. Also, feel free to ask questions in the question box, and we'll be glad to answer those perhaps at the end of the webinar, but definitely through emails after the webinar. So let me set up for the demonstration. Feel free to ask questions at this time while we do that setup. So in this part of the webinar, we're going to show you TestArchitect, and this is the TestArchitect version 7.1. And in this we'll show you how you can organize your tests and then run them inside of this environment. So TestArchitect is a interface way to be able to create and run your tests. You can also run them outside in this repository. It has its own repository. This is all protected with roles and private security check-in and check-out kind of a scenario. And then from this repository you can set up virtual machines. TestArchitect comes with a lab manager where you can run those test cases outside of this editor environment on those virtual machines or physical machines out around the world and be able to run those test cases. Here we're going to create and run test cases inside of TestArchitect, this test editor environment. So we have several projects here. We have a car rental project. We have a car rental for mobile project. And those are that's a Java application. That's what we'll be showing today. We have a music library, which is a WPF kind of application. We have a Scrum board, which is a web application. So we have different kinds of things that we can show here today. Let's go ahead and look at the car rental. So what that looks like is this application here, and it comes up with a login screen, and that login and password into a kind of car rental application where you can view available cars that you might want to rent. You can look at compact cars. Let's go back home. You can make a new order and say I want to select a date and a place to pick it up from, and you can make an order. And then you can view all the orders that you've made. So here's a directory of orders that have been made with all the information that it contains. So it's just used as a Java application to show how we can do testing on this kind of enterprise level application. So inside that project of car rental, you'll see several folders. So here we have a test folder, and that test folder consists of all the test modules that we talked about. Here we have action-based tests, and we have data-driven tests, functional tests, user interface tests, and action-based tests. So within that, multiple kinds of tests, and we'll show you a couple of these just to give you a flavor of what those tests consist of. So a test folder, you can have multiple folders here, so it's organized and as hierarchical as you want. You also have a data folder here for your data-driven tests, and we'll show you that. You have an actions folder. This is for your high-level actions that you create, and we'll show you some creation techniques for that and how easy it is to drag and drop these into your test flow. And then you have your interfaces folder. Remember, this is the interface between your application under test and your test cases to separate those out. And so each of these are an interface entity. We'll show you that. And then you have your results folder. So these are local results. This is an HTML file that shows you the results of that test case run. We'll show you that. And then all of this information, the test module, the test cases, the test data, and the test results are all checked into the repository so that the entire test team can see that result. So let's go ahead and look at a specific test. So we're looking at action-based tests here, and this is a set of test cases, and we'll look at that as a test module here. So this test module, it has a certain structure, again, very top-down and organized. It's got a set of objectives at the top, and those objectives have to be met for this test module to be successful. It's got an initial section where you do some configuration, start application, login in this case, so things that you want to start up before outside of any test cases that you want to run. These are the things you want to start up once and you don't want to run over and over again. And then we have 4 test cases, which we'll get back to, and we'll have a final section at the bottom, and that's to close things down. And just as in a good flow, you want to start things up and close them down at the end to do cleaning up. Then within that test module, and this test module is called action-based testing, we have 4 test cases. So we can look at test case 1. It's got a name, it's got an objective, and again, this objective has to be met for this test case to be successful. And we can just look at this test case and say, very easy to read and very understandable. It says rent a car and then check the total payment. If I want some details, I can say rent a car, and this is the name of the person, and this is the kind of car that we're renting, and this is the option for that car. And then check total payment, make sure that the payment is this amount. So a very easy kind of check, but the first thing you notice is this is very easy to read and very easy to understand. If we look at the second test case, same exact thing. Rent 3 cars, different kinds of cars, different options, and then check that the total payment is a certain amount. Get the total for test case 3, get the total number of available cars, rent a car, actually rent 2 cars, and then check that the total number of available cars is correct. So what you get out of this is very easy to read and understand without even knowing anything about the target platform. You don't know whether this is Java or this is going to a web app that's going to run on Chrome or Firefox or IE. You have no idea whether this is Android application or iOS. You don't know what version. All those details are in the automation engine. And this is the first thing that makes this very easy to understand and very manageable, is separating the test case itself and its objective that it has to achieve from the platforms that it needs to execute on. Okay, so that's the very key element of action-based testing. And then inside of this environment, to be able to create the tests in a very easy fashion, that's the second key, is this modular test design kind of. So let's go ahead and show you what it's like to run this kind of example. So we'll just go ahead and do the execute button here. And here we have an execute window where you have the test module with the initial and final section, and then all the test cases. And you can select which ones you want to run, and depending on how you make your test cases, you may make them flow into each other so that the next test case depends on the previous one, or you can make them independent. You can also drag and drop other test cases, so I can drag functional tests into here, data-driven tests into here, and then I can select a set of tests. Maybe I want to select just all my easy path tests and then call that, for example, my smoke tests, and then I can save that as a test suite. So a way to combine the certain functional tests that you have and select them into a set of test suite, and then be able to run them on that kind of aspect. You have some settings here for information that will go into your results file. You can also select automation tools. This is a way to hook into the harness. The harness is a way to take all your custom-driven scripts. So you have existing code you want to implement in Java or Python or C# or it's already written, any .NET language, and you can add that to your custom library and then be able to call them, include them here, and include them in the test module from an action name. You can have certain keywords. So for the variations we talked about, say I had Chrome and I wanted to run this on iOS, and just all the different kinds of keywords. Say I had different regions that I'm going to have this application run in. So here's where I would specify those different keywords, and they would all be applied to that same test case. Remember, one test case, multiple targets, and this keyword is where you specify those targets. You might also have different versions of the application, so you can select that application and its target, either the browser or OS and that kind of thing. So we can go ahead, let's just go ahead and you can also do remote execution by sending an IP address. You can do batch only. Let's go ahead and just set this to what it is and go ahead and execute that. So as this is running, just go ahead and enter in any comments or questions you might have during the running of this, and we'll be glad to answer those comments or questions. So you can see it's renting several cars, and it's saving that away, and just very quickly looking at the invoices and doing checks throughout that on multiple cars. So it's a very easy way to automate an enterprise level kind of application. So then the idea is to run those test cases, to create an HTML result file, and that's what this is right here. This looks like all of the logistics at the top with who ran it and what the time date stamp was, the machine, all the pertinent information that you want to add to that. And then the test case summary says which tests, how many test cases were run, how many passed, and how many failed, and then the assertions, the checks within those test cases. So within those checks, within those assertions, how many checks there were, how many passed, how many failed, how many were warnings and errors. And then you can go down in the details of all the test cases and be able to well, jump to any one of them, and then be able to look at the details. So this rents a car is the action line here. This is all the data that's passed, and be able to look at the information, and the assertion is down here. So we'll go ahead and look at the check. Available number of cars is 2, and and the check comes back to say it found 2 and it passed. So all the details for all the test cases that passed and failed in this HTML file. And this is checked back into the local results, and then when you check in this to the repository, it's checked into the repository. So the next thing we want to do is let's look at a different kind of tests. We can look at data-driven testing. Clearly you want to be able to drive all kinds of data to your test case. You have a set of keywords that you can use for that. In fact, let's go look at the built-in actions that are included with TestArchitect. You have system level. I won't go through these, but you can just glance at those and see all your clipboard, your screen, your file, your folders, your mouse events. You have your test support, all your if-then-else conditionals, all your checks, all your gets, get labels, all your sheets, all your interface, all your pattern stuff, all your event timing things. And then in the user interface, you have all the things that you need for your controls, your tabs, your scroll bars, your gestures for phone, everything that you need to be able to create your high-level actions from this list of built-in low-level actions. There's about 280 built-in actions here, and from those you create your high-level actions. So if we look at the data-driven example, it uses a file called car rental, and we can see what is in that file. We'll go to the data folder, and that's a file that can statically look like this. You can drag and drop this from Excel. You can get this from real-time from SQL servers or MySQL, or you could read CSV files or that kind of information. And then the names that you have up here are simply checked in the Modular itself. So the test module has those names, and so it simply goes through the data set, applies this filter. In this case, just go through all the ones that have Thomas in the name field, and that's going to be just these two, Thomas here and Thomas here in the last name field, and be able to get all of those and check to see that the information in the database is the same as the information on the application itself. And just repeat that, and then go ahead and do some checks and do the assertions down here to be able to make sure that information is correct. And then just repeat all that for the entire set. So a very easy way to do data-driven testing. Again, you don't have to have a different test case for the kinds of data that you throw at it. Okay. So next, why don't we just go through a quick example. And for that, I'm going to go to another kind of application. So let me close some of these. And I'll go to what we have is a music library. It's a music player. If I look at the functional tests, we have a music player where that looks like this. This application is not really a player. It's just a what we use for the demo of a bunch of artists with a bunch of songs, and those songs have different attributes with them, and you can search for a specific song by artist name. So if I typed in an artist here, then I can search for the songs by that artist and get a list of titles. So that's this kind of app. This is a WPF kind of application, and it's the same thing that applies. You can look at this information, these actions, and understand exactly what's going on in this test flow. So this is searching for a song, it's checking to see if a window exists, and it's doing a click on the OK. Very understandable, readable kind of flow. So let's go ahead and do, with this application, let's go ahead and bring that application back up. And on that application, let's go ahead and make a new sandbox area, and I'll just call it my sandbox. Very creative name, and that we'll just go ahead and make our own, show you what the test flow is. So the automation engineer would use some of the tools. One of them might be the action recorder. So normally here in the initial section we'd start up the application. Here we'll just use the action recorder, and you'll see a control panel in the lower right of your screen. And here we're going to do a search button, and we're going to search for an artist called Creatively, that same artist. Search button, and I could drag and drop this hand button to any of these to do a assertion, do a check on this form. I'll just go ahead and close this out. And so what will come up is if there exists a set of interfaces that can be used, it will use those in an intelligent way. If it doesn't exist, it will create that interface automatically, and I'll show you what that interface looks like. Let's go ahead and use that interface. So just using the action recorder, I get select the tab, click and enter an artist name, and then click, and then I can the automation engineer can simply take this and create an action out of this, and this is called my song search. Very generic, and I can add any of the items that I want here. Say I don't want the left and right, because I know it'll do the center of the control. I do want the artist name, and maybe I want to move that one up. And so go ahead and create that, and it will create a high-level action added to the action library called My Search Song, and it'll pass in Miles Davis. And so let's go ahead and look at what that looks like. And so it looks exactly like I recorded it, and now it's passing in the artist name of Miles Davis, which is default here. So it takes these low-level details, which is very hard to understand, and then goes and enters it according to the name that you give it. So that's one way to to create the high-level actions. Then the test engineer will take that, and maybe he or she will do that several times, and can drag and drop that into the test module, and then can drag any of these. Say this one can fill in some values, and then tab over to these and be able to fill these in, and then also be able to do an autocomplete box as you type in low-level commands that you know about. So maybe click menu item, and it will tab over and you fill in the values that you want. So it's very easy to both create the action library and then create the flow of the tests so that are very readable and understandable by everybody on the team. Okay, so that's really the easy way to create these tests and be able to expand the number of test cases you have. You can add additional test cases, of course add the objective, and be able to scale those number of tests that you have. Okay, so just wanted to show that kind of sandbox area and being able to run that. There's other things that we can show. You can do picture checks. We have a mobile demo that we can show you how this hooks up to mobile, and you can run this as a mobile kind of test in this area. And we also have our other product, TestArchitect for Visual Studio, where we can do this music player in the Visual Studio environment instead of doing it with coded UI. So if you're interested in those two, please attend our other two webinars also. close this application. And so I just want to summarize that. In summary, we want to be able to apply more than just a solution with functionality. That's important to have the functionality you require for your application, but we believe you also need certain methodologies, a keyword-driven, action-based methodology to be able to get to a higher level of abstraction, get to those business-level objectives, and then a modular test design technique to be able to build those test cases so that you can have maintainable and scalable tests. And then the test automation comes as a result of those keywords. So this will provide you a test development environment that's very fast and easy to use, create a large number of test cases with high quality in an Agile environment, and be able to have test management, be able to reuse a lot of your code, leverage the reusability aspect, and then especially have maintainable tests when that application or GUI changes in your application under test. And then test automation falls out of that, be able to add customization of code you have existing and be able to scale to a large number of tests. So that is the TestArchitect Enterprise Edition summary. I hope that gives you a lot of good information, at least a foundation for many other discussions and questions you might have. Again, feel free to continue entering questions in on the chat log, and we will get back to you on those questions. I do have a question here. One is on licensing. So for licensing, there are, again, 3 additions to TestArchitect. That's TestArchitect Professional, TestArchitect Mobile Plus for Android and iOS, and then TestArchitect Enterprise, which includes everything. You can have the full license, and you can also have run-only licenses, which can run the test cases you create with the full licenses, run those in the outside of the TestArchitect environment from the repository, or as we said, from TFS and MTM. It also integrates to Jenkins, also integrates to Quality Center for your ALM kind of environment. So that's on licensing. I'd be glad to answer any other questions. You can go to logicgear.com to learn more about LogicGear, and you can go to testarchitect.com to learn more about the products that we can provide to you. I'd be glad to continue the conversation. I'm looking forward to keeping in contact with you. Again, thank you so much for your time during this webinar, and we hope to talk to you soon.